Oi oi, it's your boy, Jack Slack, Fights Gone By Podcast, episode 152. And you know what they say? They say, it's often the cards that lack the name power that provide the most excitement. And I think we got our proof this weekend. Nah, it was shite. Yeah, really not great UFC event, but we predicted it probably wasn't going to be a great UFC event. Some redeeming features, some inverted shooting, wheel kicking, crowd annoying redeeming features, and then some just garbage. Bad stoppage in the main event by her. Well, we'll get into that in a minute. Let's do some news first. All kinds of stuff been going on since the last time we did some news. Let's focus on China today, because China is where it's getting interesting. Well, as you know, the UFC is building this new performance institute in China or whatever. They're doing another big push into China, because they sort of got scared off when Kung Lee stopped being relevant. They were like, uh-oh, our Vietnamese guy who looks sort of Chinese is no longer here to push in China. But now they're going back, and that's why we've got the rushed fight between Weili, whoever, and Jessica Andrade for the women's strawweight title. But as the UFC keeps trying to push into China, China keeps making it harder. We talked last week very briefly about Zhu Jiangdong, the Chinese mixed martial artist. He's not a very good mixed martial artist, but he is out there trying to make fights happen. I think he promotes too. But basically, he said that Kung Fu is bullshit or whatever. Oh no, it was a Tai Chi master he said that about. There was a challenge match. He easily knocked this guy down. And since then, he's been fighting lots of old Kung Fu masters who claim to have the real Kung Fu. And it's pretty crazy. Like, the Chinese just will not accept that traditional Kung Fu is not holding up, and they keep sending in old dudes to get beat up by him too. It's just so stupid, because like when they lose they go, well, couldn't your young disciple have done that in your place? But no, the older you get in Kung Fu, the better you are as a Kung Fu master or whatever. I don't think they call it Kung Fu, it's like Chuan Fa or whatever, in China at least. So he's fought a Wing Chun guy, a couple of Tai Chi guys, but he always wins, obviously, because he's actually a fighter, you know. He's not a good fighter, but he is actually sparring quite a lot and knows how to fight. Whereas these guys are, you know, Well, I think part of the thing that you realise in all of his challenge matches is that for him it is just another scrap with resistance, and for them it's like a life and death thing. And that's what happens if you don't spar and test your stuff regularly. Every time you do becomes this enormous deal, you know, and he just goes through the motions and beats them up anyway. And he's not even like taking them down for the most part. You know, it's not proving that grappling is above all other things or whatever, which is what we had to do. Well, what the UFC and Vale Tudo Japan and things had to prove was that kickboxing/boxing wasn't as good as being able to take someone down. He's actually having to prove that, you know, he can just hit people on the feet. But at any rate, in the course of this, the Chinese government have been pushing back hard against him, because while China has basically destroyed all of their culture and history, they are still keen on Kung Fu being respected. So what they did was they just lowered his social credit rating to D-, I think it was, or whatever the equivalent letter is in Chinese. But that means that he can't fly on planes, he can't even take high-speed trains. So he had to like take a 36-hour train and then a flight to get to his most recent fight with the Kung Fu master. They keep making him apologise. He has to apologise like once every day for a week to each of these Kung Fu masters he beats publicly on Facebook or whatever. Not Facebook, Chinese equivalent. They've closed down a load of his social media accounts. It's just, you know, an Orwellian dystopia, and MMA has somehow become part of that. But anyway, the story gets funnier because, well, not funnier, tragic, but this week China and the Chinese MMA governing body agreed that fighters with tattoos should no longer be allowed to compete in MMA. Now, part of that is to do with the same reason that Japan, if you go to Japan, there aren't a lot of gyms that will let you train with tattoos on show. That goes for like judo and karate dojos as well. You know, there are a few, I think Purebred, Enson Inoue's place is fine with them. Kid Yamamoto's place was obviously fine with them back in the day because he loved his tattoos. But tattoos have a link to the Yakuza in Japan, and then, you know, the triads and various other secret societies in China. As we talked about in our history episodes, they love their secret societies over there. But it's a criminal link, and China has now decided that you can't fight with tattoos. Not a huge problem in China, you'd imagine. There's got to be enough people who don't have them if they have that social stigma, but a fairly large problem if you want to take any of your good MMA fighters from around the world over to China, because if there's one thing you'll notice when you're watching any UFC fight, it's that a lot of dudes have tattoos. They wouldn't be able to see the brilliant chest piece that Darren Elkins has, or when Frank Mir had Mir tattooed on his back so he wouldn't forget his name. So that was interesting. Gets even more interesting when you realise that One is hosting an event there on Friday. I think Friday, maybe Saturday. But it's part of the Hero Series. And they don't often announce who's on these cards, the Hero Series. It's like local schlubs. And someone was complaining this week, or just today actually, someone was saying that they only get paid $1,000 show and win. Which is low, but still not as low as I've seen. You know, World Series of Fighting paid a guy $500 once. But anyway, One's going there this weekend. Haven't announced any of their fighters. I'm imagining that they're now scrambling to find fighters without tattoos. So that's just China being China. What else we got going on? We got some fight announcements. Khalil Roundtree Jr., Lumpini Roundtree, if you're nasty like that. He's fighting Ion Cutelaba in UFC Copenhagen. I like his chances, but I also like Cutelaba's chances there, because Khalil Roundtree is famously hit and miss. And Ion Cutelaba, good for a round and then just gasses it out hard. But basically, big boys banging, which is what we like. What else is going on? In terms of UFC fights, Brandon Moreno has been re-signed to the UFC roster. You'll know Brandon Moreno as a flyweight, and they've also signed Askar Askarov, who's undefeated, I think, Russian flyweight. So that's two more flyweights, one who was already with the UFC and then left, but back on the roster, which it's kind of up in the air, because like Brandon Moreno's been brought back to fight at the Mexico card because there aren't an awful lot of Mexicans in the UFC. But why bring Askarov in as well? You know, why bring a new flyweight talent in? So promising for the flyweight division. It does seem like, you know, because they did cut a lot of flyweights, it seems like they must be changing their minds. And then for C-tier fight announcement news, or rather from the C-tier promotion, Koreshkov versus Larkin for October. That sounds good. And Bellator has also announced that their Featherweight Grand Prix is starting on September 7th. Haven't actually put out the brackets yet as far as I can figure, but they have announced that Patricio Freire is going to be defending the featherweight title against Archuleta in the first round, and that's going to be going on September 28th, so that's good. Lot of promise there. I wish I could see the brackets, but I can't find them at the moment. And then one news, Eddie Alvarez is back into the lightweight Grand Prix. He was going to be fighting Edouard Foliang. He might still be fighting Edouard Foliang. Basically, like 3 dudes who are due to fight in the semi-finals of this lightweight Grand Prix are out with injury. Chatri's been running around kneecapping dudes with lead pipes, because that's the only way you can get... I mean, you're supposed to have a reserve for these sort of things, but if there's 3 dudes dropped out, that's incredible. So Alvarez is back in the Grand Prix. Properly strange. But we've got some One stuff to get onto with what happened on their card this weekend in a second. But recap-wise, we'll go into the UFC first. Not a tremendous amount to ruminate on from this card. Pretty... well, more missed than hit is what I'd say. Benito Lopez versus Vince Morales, just a weird style matchup in that both guys absolutely stuck to the one thing they were doing and refused to attempt anything else. I can't remember if there was a takedown attempt, but for the most part, it was Lopez throwing kicks and then Morales moving in to try and box. Morales actually, his hands looked sharp when he went in. He double jab, right hand over the top, and then left hook, left hook to the body. You know, he was going... he was working his way in with the jab, throwing the long right hand, and then following up with a flurry to the body, and it looked really good. Problem was, he did it like 3 times in the fight. Lopez just kicked him in the leg and moved around, and it wasn't like he was setting them up. He wasn't doing anything clever with them. He was just kicking a lot, and Morales looked completely lost, because Morales had like a toed-in stance, and just kept taking the kicks to the leg. Neither man really changed their strategy at any point. It was... pretty underwhelming. Though I did appreciate Benito Lopez's black and white cookie haircut. Brianna Van Buren versus Livia Renato Souza. Van Buren firstly reminded me a little bit of, what's it called? Danielle, can't remember her name. The other very short black lass who is super explosive, or supposed to be super explosive. Van Buren came out, flurried hard, and then went to the clinch. And that was the whole fight. Just like there'd be a burst of activity where she didn't really do much, but Souza would be like, oh no, and then cover up and then clinch. Very slow, tedious fight. Speaking of which, Martinez versus Pingwan Liu was the same. Pingwan Liu was circling. They were talking about the wrestling, and then no wrestling occurred. Liu just circled the ring and threw spazzy punches and kicks, and Martinez did hit him with a few good knees up the centre at various points, because Liu would just try and duck in whenever he threw punches. He'd just crouch over, and then finally hit him with a knockout knee in the third round. But like, that was, I think that might have been the first or second one he attempted in that round. He had success with it in round 1 or 2, hitting several in a row. And you're like, yeah, just keep doing that. And then he stopped doing that. They just went into this rubbish kickboxing match. Then you get into the only quality fight on the card. Actually, there were a couple, but the best fight on the card, Ryan Hall versus Darren Elkins. You knew I was going to love this because I did a Filthy Casuals guide to Ryan Hall in the week, which I think had like 30,000 views by the time the fight rolled around, and now it's got like 100,000. This was so good. I loved it. And he unveiled a new wrinkle yet again. A couple of new wrinkles, actually. The wheel kicks, he wasn't really doing those in the past. Didn't throw as many side kicks as I'd have liked. Did use a few of them. But he was doing all kinds of clever stuff, and it really made me think, because he's been working with Kenny Florian, and they were saying that Kenny Florian's been a big part of trying to improve this weird style he's bringing. Had Faraz and Kenny in the corner, but there were some really interesting looks in this one, and I was looking at it going, you know what, I think what Ryan really excels at, because he's not a very fast or explosive fighter on the feet, what he's very good at, generally, is knowing where he is before the opponent's caught up. And I think that's the whole thing with the 50-50 and things like that. You know, he used to catch guys all the time, and he still does in MMA. Catches guys by being in the 50-50 while they're still like, what's going on, and putting their hands on the mat while he's rolling under them. But some of these moves that he was pulling off, they look like he just did weird shit and then went for a roll apropos of nothing. But I think a couple of them were planned out, because I saw him do this several times. I think he did this 3 times in the first round. Might have been 2 times in the first round and then once later on. But he fought most of the fight southpaw. Elkins was orthodox. He was southpaw. He threw a left body kick, which you don't see him do that much anyway. He's mainly a right leg kicker. But threw a left body kick, put the foot down sort of in front of him and between Elkins' feet, and then attempted the upside down shot Imanari roll, whatever you want to call it, but from an orthodox stance. And we were talking about this on the Filthy Casuals guide. A lot of the time when he's doing them, he's going outside the lead leg. You know, he's matched up open guard style, so he's southpaw, they're orthodox. He changes level, leans his head outside of their lead knee, and then hits the roll around that lead leg, which is it tends to be a little bit further out, and they do tend to snatch their lead leg back, but it's a bit safer because, you know, we've all seen Imanari versus Joachim Hansen, where Imanari just rolls with his head between Joachim's legs about 4 times, and then Joachim finally hits him with a knee while he's doing it. You know, the upside down shot is not necessarily uninterceptable. Interceptable? Fucking hell. I'm tired today, sorry. But yeah, so you can get kneed doing it. But the way Ryan does that, where he goes deep to the outside of the leg, that's a nice way of taking your head away from where they can knee. Think like Khabib versus McGregor. He comes out, feints with his head, McGregor jumps up for a knee, throws his head straight to the outside of McGregor's lead leg instead, and takes him down. I think he got kneed in the shoulder in the process of it, but there's that difference between where your head is the important part. But, as I was saying, and I said this in the Filthy Casuals guide, something I noticed was that he has a lot more success actually entangling people when he goes head to the inside, and that tends to be on the closed guard shots. So when he's orthodox and his opponent's orthodox, or he's southpaw and his opponent's southpaw, like against Lobov. And one of the interesting things about that is that when he does it same foot forward and goes head inside, he tends to get both their legs a lot more often. It's like he snatches up both, and they tend to fall over. Happened to Lobov, Maynard, Elkins. So he ended up both feet, and then he ended up like sitting through and coming up on one leg instead. Whereas, he did go head inside with Penn, I think, but he came into the 50-50. I think, you know, it's all going to depend on where their feet are, but I think it seems at the moment like head inside, or same stance, and head inside, Imanari roll, is more likely for him to get both legs and knock him over. So he was doing that a lot. He was doing southpaw left body kick, put the foot down, orthodox Imanari roll. And I immediately was like, I'm going to have to try that on the heavy bear, because I ran down the garage and did that. But very, very cool. And there were a couple of very interesting ones. It was interesting watching him trying to get onto orthodox stance generally, because the wheel kick typically works better in a closed guard scenario. If you watch Stephen Thompson, who I know is, or at least the Thompson style has been an influence on Ryan, if you watch him, tends to go southpaw for most of his kicking and use the hook kick, because then it comes in through the open side of the opponent. They've only got their rear hand guarding against it. They can't just duck down behind their lead shoulder. Whereas if you wheel kick off that stance, you're going to have your back leg come through, which is your left, and it's going to come over their back. And there's all that time for them to duck down. They can get down behind their shoulder. They can just get down, you know. That's the natural move, to lean into the stance. Very hard to lean away from, lean out the back of your stance. Whereas when Thompson wheel kicks, like against Ellenberger, he'll switch to be on the same stance with the opponent and then wheel kick, and then the wheel kick ends up coming through the open side. So the hook kick is like the end part of the wheel kick, but it's from a different stance. So you saw Ryan doing things like he'd spin for a back kick to the body and then spin back for the wheel kick to the head. But he was also using wheel kicks from the southpaw stance, and they were coming, just clipping over the top of the head on Elkins. I think the really good hurting ones were orthodox. I'll have to go back and look at it, but it was terrific. There were lots of little moves, and I'll probably write a little something about it, but very cool nonetheless. And the crowd was so mad. And I think this one went down better than the Gray Maynard one, particularly because he stunned Elkins a couple of times. The wheel kicks worked. Also caught him with a couple of left hands. And if you watch Ryan throw his hands, it's not, like I said, it's not very quick, not particularly explosive when you look at someone who's been throwing their hands their whole life, or just one of these natural talents that ends up in the UFC after like 2 years of training. But what you noticed about one of the really good ones was that Elkins was coming forward and he just intercepted him with the left hand. And Ryan seemed surprised that it worked so well. But then, you know, that's the one. If you can get guys walking onto punches, you've got a great chance of hurting them, even if you aren't a huge hitter in your own right. And then he went straight after him and caught him with a long lancing left later on. So getting more confidence in his hands. I was looking at Ryan's hands for the Filthy Casuals guide because I was watching the Sal Rogers fight, and I didn't put a lot of that in the Filthy Casuals guide because I was just focusing on the cool stuff that Ryan does and not how Rogers did very well. Rogers is a really interesting case because he did so well, but ended up not being able to come to the UFC because of, I think it was visa issues. But yeah, I think he's lost like one fight since then, but he's fought about 8 times. So bit sad that we don't get to see him in the UFC, as he did so well against Ryan. Though obviously only a 2-round fight. And I say fight, you know, exhibition match, but they were taking it seriously. But in that Rogers fight, he ended up going to Rogers a bit and getting caught on the way in. It was like he had to, he's in this, and this is something that's like been exaggerated by the sidekick too. You know, he's got this nice long stance, his head's a long way back. It's what the Heavy Hands boys are always saying about Rockhold. His head was a long way back, so you still had to travel a big distance to hit him. And if you're going to try and hit him in the lean, you've really got to get in on him. Watch Bisping versus Rockhold for that, the first one, where Bisping's running after him and getting check hooked non-stop. But Ryan's nice and far back in his stance, and when he goes to people, he tends to square up more and offer himself up as a target. And if you do that with just the left straight, you know, it can be a little bit of a big opening to leave, you know, for just that one strike. But yeah, lanced Elkins with it. Elkins was proper weird at the end. He was like, yeah, and acting like he'd won. You're going, what fight did you watch? And then they announced the judges' scores, and they were like 29-28, and Ryan was just like, what? But yeah, gets the decision, does his shrug thing when the crowd boos him. But I think it's catching on, because the number of people who looked up this Filthy Casual, I mean, this is a very anecdotal example, but well, I suppose it's got numbers in, but so many people have looked up that Ryan Hall video that I did just since that fight, and there's been tons of comments of people just like, I love it, love his style. There's been a few who are like, I hate it, but it seems to have gone down better than the Gray Maynard one, and I think actually kicking the guy in the head when you're on the feet, well, or hurting him rather, probably helped. But the interesting thing is, like, people are so upset about this, you know, you're flopping guard, you shouldn't be allowed to flop guard. And you're like, why shouldn't you be allowed to flop guard? The other guy has the chance to jump on top of him. He has the chance to do anything he wants. He can stand there and kick him in the legs, which is what Elkins tried several times, and Ryan just kicked into the kick or kicked the standing leg. There was a good one, actually, where Ryan almost entangled his legs off the floor, and Elkins had to turn and run. You know, either do the Alan Belcher and just get in there and risk it, or you don't have a leg to stand on when you say, like, you shouldn't be allowed to flop guard. Okay, you shouldn't be allowed to take people down. And he did actually shoot, and there was a nice wheel kick into double leg on Elkins, and Elkins is a good wrestler. Lots of people like, you know, I wish we had stomps and soccer kicks. That would put an end to this nonsense. And I'm in two minds, because, like, you know, I'm saying now I don't want people I don't want any rules put on flopping guard. I think if you're doing it and you're effective and the other person's scared to engage you, why not? And it's not flopping guard either. It's not like what's Matt Serra's brother's name? Got disqualified for that. Vitor Belfort performances, where you just flop guard. He's aggressively going after people's legs. But if you tried to put some kind of rule on that, that'd suck. So I'm well in favour of bringing back soccer kicks, stomps, knees to the head. The thing is, people forget that Imanari made this famous, or pioneered this, under rule sets where you were allowed to kick people in the head on the ground. And Shinya Aoki too, both of them did wonderful work from guard or diving on legs in rule sets where you were allowed to kick them in the head. Soccer kicks and stomps are not magic, and most of the people that were stopped by soccer kicks or stomps in Pride were already hurt, or the guys who did well with them as actual weapons, Vanderlei Silva, well, not even Vanderlei actually, just Shogun really, really didn't do well against very good grapplers. The top one that Shogun stopped was Ricardo Arona, and that was very weird connection. He missed a stomp, hit him with a hammer fist, and somehow the hammer fist put him out. But if you watch the later Pride fights, it's like wall walking was coming in, soccer kicks and stomps were just getting guys' legs entangled, and then they'd fall over, like Vanderlei Silva versus Yoshida 2. The reason people are so nostalgic for it is that we didn't get to see the best of the best in those rules after 2008, basically. Would Ryan be able to chill with his, in an actual inverted position waiting for the opponent to come in? No, but then that's not a big change to make. The inverting underneath people's legs is not the same as just staying inverted and waiting for them to kick you in the head. That being said, Elkins did come close to a couple of times to kick him in the head on the ground, and, I think, because Ryan got upset at Gray Maynard for kicking him in the face when he'd entangled him and knocked him over, you just got to be ready for that. If you're fighting that sort of style, guys are going to kick you in the head illegally. You just got to look after yourself because you don't want to get knocked out by an illegal kick to the head. You'll pick up your win bonus by DQ or whatever, but you don't want to take knockouts. It's the same with John Jones when you come out in that crouched position and then Vitor Belfort tries to kick you in the head and John McCarthy goes, well, yeah, it's against the rules, but I can't physically stop him from kicking you in the head if he does it, and your head's there. So moving on, Juliana Pena versus Nico Montagna. A lot of people really down on this fight. I thought it was alright, better than I expected. I thought Nico Montagna looked really quite strong for the first half. In fact, it basically was a fight of two halves because it was all Nico Montagna up until about halfway through round 2, and then it was all Juliana Pena. Both of them hitting nice snap downs, front headlock stuff. I would love to see that become more of a thing than the head and arm throw for women's MMA. I thought it was solid grappling. Bit spoiled because you got Ryan Hall and Michele Nicolini fighting in the same weekend, so anything is going to look less than that, but it was decent. Andre Fili versus Shaman Marias. I mean, this was a quick one, but Fili looking good. Fili, been one of my boys for a little while, but I've always liked how his striking coming along. It's he's got some nice boxing, but it's kind of mixed with a weird kicky game. Sometimes he looks a bit, gets stuck in the same thing. I think might have been Johnson, might have been Miles Jury, where he was scoring the jab constantly, but really wasn't following with the right hand all that well. Come to think of it, might have been Cater. I've lost track of time completely over the last few cards. But times a kick off Shaman Marias. I think it was a left body kick. Takes it on the forearm, throws back the right hand, dings him on the chin, and immediately the right leg comes up in a right high kick. Beautiful little counter combination. You couldn't have hoped for a better landing on both strikes. And Marias is properly wobbled, but manages to get up. Fili moves in towards the fence. Marias comes off the fence swinging, and Fili just hits him with a quick flurry of counters and knocks him down again. Absolutely lovely stuff. What's Fili on? Oh, he's only on a 2-fight win streak, but that split decision to Johnson was a close one, and before that was another 2 wins. So yeah, in good shape. Getting towards the upper names of that division now. John Allen versus Mike Rodriguez was shite. Marvin Vittori versus Cesar Ferreira was not particularly good. Carl Robertson versus Wellington Truman. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Josh Emmett versus Mirsad Berktik. I thought Emmett looked fantastic in this one. I joked on Twitter that because of his high pace, constant movement, big power, and weird nips, we're going to call him the Dynamo. But he looked good. Lots of movement. Boxing looked good. Wasn't just 1-2s. Moved his head well, moved his shoulders. And Bektic, I've seen Bektic look good on the feet in fights, but that was against lesser strikers, and he just looked out of sorts here. Didn't it was one of those things where he was moving to his man and didn't seem to know how to close the distance on someone who was actually pretty defensively good. And it was just a quick jab from Emmett that put him down. Tapology's got power jab. But no, just stepped onto a jab, got knocked down. You know, same as Edson Barboza by Donald Cerrone. Happens, oh, hang on, who else did it? Oh, Ricardo Lamas against, was that Bermudez? That happens a lot in MMA. If you step onto a jab, good chance of getting knocked down. Especially if it hits you in the chin. I tell you what, though, I'm thinking now, what if we did Mirsad Bektic versus Ryan Hall? Because Ryan's getting up there towards the top 15 now, and Bektic's in there. Because Bektic's a really good wrestler and a really good top player, and does, you know, most of his top play is from the knees. He'd be proper grinding into Ryan. And big hitter, but would he be confused by the distance? Would Ryan be flustered by someone trying to slap his kicks aside and run in and flurry on him? I think that's a good matchup. And of course, the hitting power is very much on one end of that matchup. Uriah Faber versus Ricky Simone. I mean, what did I say last week? I was like, do you know what? I reckon Ricky Simone is probably the best fighter you could have matchup-wise for Uriah Faber to come back and beat. Because he loves eating a right hand. He really does. And that's what happens. Comes out, did all right, low-kicked a bit, walks onto a right hand, flops around on the floor for a bit, gets stopped by punches. Bit of an early stoppage, but, you know, if you've already been knocked down by a 40-year-old man, you deserve your loss. And then Jermaine Durandamy versus Aspen Ladd in the main event. Did not like this stoppage at all. Loved the counter. I mean, we were saying this last week. I was saying, Aspen Ladd just jabs. And she did it. She came out this round and she was like, slap with the right hand, jab with the left. Looked to palm her jabs and jab back. And she just walked forward doing that. Durandamy dropped away, hit her with the left hand in the face, just like she'd done to Holm like 8 times. And Aspen Ladd went down. One punch, follows her to the floor, lands a glancing blow. Herb Dean's stepping in, but Aspen Ladd is hip rolling back to put her hips in front of Durandamy, and she's catching the ankle. You know, she's not like fetal, she's not turtled. The criteria is intelligently defending yourself, and I think actually trying to play guard is intelligently defending herself. You didn't have time to not see her, or to see her not intelligently defending herself there. She wasn't obviously unconscious or anything. You know, didn't do a what the hell. Wasn't super mad at Herb Dean or anything. I just felt like, you know, if you haven't seen people come back from worse than this in the first round in MMA, you haven't watched a lot of MMA. This happens all the time. Guys get dropped immediately, scramble around on the ground while the other guy's trying to finish them, and then end up back in the fight. So yeah, not a great card, bit shite. And then there was a Bellator card, wasn't great, but there was a nice front kick from Julia Budd to the body, that is. And there was a one card. And on that, not a lot really happened. I mean, there was the rematch between Giorgio and Peshmorakot, which was a nice, fun, scrappy affair, both of them going back and forward, both of them complaining to the ref a lot. You know, Peshmorakot kneeing and then holding his arms out, being like, I'm not holding him. Giorgio Petrosian obviously uses the clinch a lot to stifle exchanges and to end exchanges and get broken. And Giorgio Petrosian grabs the leg in the first round off a kick, and Peshmorakot's like, wait. And the ref's like, stop. So the ref was proper shitting bricks in this one, because he knew he was on show to the world. So he had to be really strict on catching kicks and things like that, which makes it a little bit, to be honest, kickboxing works best when you're kind of lax on the rules. You know, if you actually, well, remember when Saenchai went to Glory, if you actually call all the leg catches into punches, it's kind of lame. But then that's just really what one is exposing. It's just quite hard to actually keep all the rules. So was it worth overturning the original decision? Well, Giorgio goes through to the next round. That's corrected. And someone was saying, hey, when did Giorgio become an Evolve fighter? Because he was wearing Evolve on all his gear. And I was like, when he wanted to win the decision, that's when. They still do this thing where they pretend that these guys train at Evolve together. They, you know, Misha Tate, oh, you know him, you train at Evolve. No, you don't actually. Some guy who worked at Evolve for a while is often hitting me up on Facebook and being like, yeah, RDO was never there. He never went to Evolve. It's such a crock of shit. But anyway, and then the co-main event was Michelle Nicolini versus Angela Lee. Michelle Nicolini, jiu-jitsu goddess. Like, I don't think, is she the most accomplished female jiu-jitsu player of all time? She's a multiple time world champion, gi and no gi. Great at this, you know, the single collar and single spider hook guard. Hits some beautiful, like, tilting triangles off there. But it also plays in no gi, obviously. very good at toe holding people. But her MMA record, I think it was only like 4-2 coming into this fight. I think they were hoping for Angela Lee to sprawl on her and beat her up on the feet. And Michele Nicolini is tiny, whereas Angela Lee actually fights in the weight class above when she wants to. Weird that they've solved weight cutting and no one actually cuts weight, but also Angela Lee is big enough to compete in 2 weight classes. But Michele Nicolini shot a takedown in the first round, and she basically ended up on the bottom of half guard, like all these jiu-jitsu players are now, with the underhook. Came up for the Lucas Leitch style outside hook guard, got whipped back down and went straight into a deep half guard, which is something you don't see an awful lot of. And then I think she kicked through into an X and ended up sweeping her. But most of the fight was Michele Nicolini on top, either mounting or knee on belly, and Olivia Coste telling her to work from these positions, because Olivia Coste is a suspiciously bad referee, especially when the Lees are fighting. And then later, Angela Lee scrambles up, Michele Nicolini grabs a hold of a low single and is turtle but on the leg, and Angela Lee drops her knee on Michele Nicolini's brainstem, and the referee has to ignore it. There was a blatant 12-6 elbow into the eye from Mount from Lee earlier on. I don't know what their rule is on 12-6 elbows because I've not actually been able to find it. I googled it and Matt Hume was like, I don't like the 12-6 elbow rule, but there is doesn't seem to be anywhere in the official one rules. But anyway, yeah, Olivia Coste, shit referee or corrupt referee, one or the other. But yeah, judges ended up giving it to Nicolini. Hilarious. I would have loved to see Chatri's face. Of course, it does mean that Singapore is going to be short on doctors in about 5-10 years' time. Anyway, let's do a quick question or two and we'll get out of here. Oh, I've got one that's not really a question, but a follow-up. Dear Jack, you know who wouldn't have ruined the UFC main and co-main events? Jason fucking Herzog, that's who. See the way he stopped the Fili and Emmett fights if you need some evidence. From Francis. Yep, Jason Herzog, still our boy on this podcast. Official referee at the Fights Gone By podcast. Dear Senior Slakinski, I got in an argument with my friend earlier today about the depth of striking arts versus grappling arts and was hoping that you could explain why my friend is both wrong and an idiot. My friend trains and competes in BJJ and MMA and insists that the grappling arts are much deeper than the striking arts, both within their respective sports and integrated together in MMA. He argues that because a puncher's chance exists, striking is inherently shallow. I, alas, am a filthy casual who only consumes as many fight analyses as humanly possible, and I argued that this is an entirely ludicrous statement to make. The prominence and popularity of striking arts, particularly boxing in America, makes striking appear more accessible to the average person, but gives both an accessibility and an illusion of shallowness compared to less prominent arts such as wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Since I don't train my body, didn't listen to a word I said, and further argued that grapplers have dominated MMA in all areas. Show some solidarity and support for your proud Patreon boy, or make me look like a knob and don't respond at all. Either way, you have me as a proud Patreon boy for the foreseeable future. Here's hoping you actually respond to this petty email. Best wishes, Taylor. It's a weird one. I mean, there is a tremendous depth to the striking game, as you can see from the numerous styles on show in MMA. I mean, I pick a fighter each week that I want to look at for a Filthy Casuals guide or something like that, and just looking at their specific habits, I'm going, damn, that's cool, I should start working on that. But I don't have the time to put into that to become really good at that particular thing that they're doing. Like the Stephen Thompson lead leg kicking game off his right side. I think that's part of the difference between the striking game and the grappling game. In the striking game, you can have a few things you're good at, and then get by on distance, cover-ups, head movement, things like that, for dealing with all the opponent's offense. In the jiu-jitsu game, you can have the few things you're good at. There are very specialized guys, like you will never see Marcelo Garcia using the De La Riva. He'll sit up, pummel his foot inside, scoot back, get to his butterfly guard. He'll pass high to his left side, low to his right side. He's very famously said that that's what he does. He focuses on those. You can watch all his tournament footage of him doing those, but you do still have to have a degree of understanding of what to do when you get in other positions. It's like you can't escape side control just from one side, because the other guy might... There are guys like Chael Sonnen was doing it to Brian Stan, who want to attack from one side control, so they'll switch sides. They'll just run around the top, or he was doing this weird little cradle thing and then stepping over Stan's legs. You can be rolling with someone who plays a ton of seated guard one minute. You can be rolling with a guy who plays exclusively supine guards the next minute. And I think jiu-jitsu certainly, and grappling generally, are more comfortable with guys experimenting and finding their own style. Whereas boxing, you tend to be drilled in whatever your coach does, and there's a right way to do things under that coach. But what I was saying was, I think in grappling, you have to have a larger understanding of a lot more stuff that you don't use, whereas in striking, you can just do your things and then use the same distance, footwork, evasions with almost everything. There are exceptions like axe kick. No one knows how to deal with an axe kick. But, defensive considerations of footwork are pretty simple, and then you just have to get used to using them in different contexts. Whereas, you could never play the 50-50. You could never look for the 50-50 in your life, and then suddenly you're with someone and they just drag you into the 50-50. I mean, that was Ryan Hall. One of his selling points on the DVD was like, if you teach a white belt to use the 50-50, he can tie up purple belts, brown belts in the 50-50 and make it complicated for them. There are always these new positions coming along in grappling. Keenan said the same thing about the lapel guard. He used to try it in training, and then the guys he was working with back when he was like a purple belt, brown belt, just banned him from doing it. They were like, no, it's not a legit technique, stop using it, because it makes it so complicated for him. But I would say the depth thing, there is some... Your friend's sort of right. Like, there's a lot more to understand and keep up with in grappling than in striking, which is, there are still developments going on, but it's been largely the same for many, many years. Of course, that's not to say that... a lack of complexity in striking is... I'm sure your friend wouldn't argue that there's a lack of complexity in striking. The fact that you can get by on just a few tricks is seen as like a lack of complexity or depth, but really it's the understanding of those tricks and being able to use them well. A tokui waza, as they call it in judo or karate, having that favorite technique, and you just learn all the ins and outs of landing that technique. And that's the same, as in jiu-jitsu. Find as many ways as possible to get into your triangle or your armbar or whatever. I think a lot of what makes striking so difficult for a lot of people, even guys who have a lot of experience sparring and striking and things like that, what makes people, and consequently makes them sort of underestimate it or think it's more of a game of craps than grappling, is that you do not have direct control of your opponent all the time. There are times you do, like when you're coming in and out of a clinch, or you've got a hand on someone or something like that. But a lot of the time, the part that's difficult is controlling people when you have no contact on them. And really, that's as much to do with reading them as it is to do with leading them. The one thing you can almost guarantee you're in control of is if you step back, the opponent will step forward, but he might lunge forward, he might come willingly onto your punches, he might very carefully pressure forward, like say Masvidal versus Cerrone or something like that, where they're never really giving you that opportunity to intercept them. They're just going, okay, I'm going to keep moving up to you. The other example is like turning people. If you keep turning outside their lead leg, you force them to turn, you know where they're going to be. And that's the stuff that really makes the difference between just going out there and kickboxing and being a good scientific striker and really learning the depth that there is to the craft. It's the part where you're trying to control someone, or not even really control them. It's like, it's basically herding a cat or something like that. It's matching anticipation and encouragement, and working out how to get the opponent moving in ways that are predictable so that you can time him with the stuff that you want to work. And that's where striking gets complicated. But you can do well in MMA and even in kickboxing without ever really appreciating that. Cheers, Taylor. Right, God, that was a slow weekend of fights, but there's some good stuff coming up this weekend. We've got the battle of the clinch-striking gods, Leon Edwards versus Rafael Dos Anjos. We've got a load of heavyweight stinkers. We've got some good stuff happening in the lightweight division, James Vick versus Dan Hooker. We've got the long boys, and some other stuff going on there that I can't remember. So stuff to look forward to. I'll be writing something in the week for the Patreon boys. I might do a little Ryan Hall inverted shot analysis thing, but we'll also have something else later coming in the week, probably a preview of the weekend stuff. So sign up to the Patreon to support the podcast, and send your emails to fightsconepodcast@gmail.com, and check the fightprimer.com to see what I'm writing at any time. I might end up writing something for the Pacquiao fight this weekend, to be honest. We'll see. I'm your boy Jack Slack, rolling around with your feet over your head, bless.